This week on Culture Diaries, we are Terra Culture, a 10-year-old cultural center in the heart of Victoria Island. And my guest today is a poet, also turned actress, but more importantly, she constantly moves me to tears with every single performance. I also call her my fellow earthly sister. Her name is Titilope Sonuga. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right, so when people think of spoken word poetry, people think it's a bit of a cerebral art form and all of those sorts of things. But I know we've had this conversation before, and you got into poetry because you like the sound of your own voice.
I feel like every time I hear you repeat that, I'm like, hey, Wana's gonna make me sound shallow. But honestly, I hadn't thought about really being deep or saying something important. It took me years, and as I was growing up as a woman, as a person, I started to my voice started to evolve. But when I first started, I just heard spoken word and I thought, this sounds cool. I sound cool. I can do this. And so I was just writing poetry about whatever and performing it because I like the sound of my voice and I liked the reaction that it got. But I hadn't thought about really trying to say something that mattered.
Okay.
So how were you able to find your voice? And do you think you found it yet?
I think my voice changes as I change. Like the more I become a woman, the more I grow and evolve, the more my art form reflects that. And so I don't put any pressure on myself to get it right the first time. I know that I've come a long way from where I first started. I know I have a desire and there's an urgency to say things that matter now that wasn't there when I first started doing poetry. This was in 2007, it was a long time ago. And I feel like the more exposed I am, the deeper my work gets, and which is part of the reason why I'm sure we're going to get to that. Part of the reason why I moved back home because I was writing I was observing from a very far off place and just making commentary on and this very romanticized idea of being African. Every African poet has like a Mama Africa poem, So that's where I started. But living here, the context is different. So the work obviously has to evolve as a result of that. So it's taken. I think even just. I'm a big reader, I'm a big student of my art, and so I don't think gift or talent is enough. I read a lot of poetry, I know the people who inspire me, and so even kind of rubbing up against that helps you find who it is that you are, and so I've been doing that for a very long time, and I think we're getting there somehow.
When I listen to your words, and I think it also evokes the same emotions for a lot of people, it's very, I say your work is very visceral, and it's always also very picturesque. Was it very deliberate in terms of choosing how you wanted to write or how you wanted to communicate your work with other people?
Yes, it's become that way more so than it was in the beginning, like I said. I think I'm very particular about how words sound side by side. So when I first approach a writing project, I'm like, just get the words on a page. So you just pour out whatever it is that you're inspired to write. But then the editing process has to be very cutthroat. I have a friend who calls editing killing puppies. It's a lot like that. You have to go in and just decide, okay, which part of this is relevant, which part of this is important. And there's even some editing that happens in performance as well. You realize you forget whole chunks of your poem and nothing changed. And then you realize maybe that wasn't such a relevant piece after all. But I'm particular about the way words sound. I feel like in the same way that a singer has this perfect pitch, this note that they hit. I think poets also have the sweet sounds of words, and this sounds very poetic, but I mean it. I know that there's certain words when you string them together, no matter what it is that you're saying, there's an emotional reaction that happens in people's body. And so finding those words and grouping them together, and then still telling this big story overall. It's a bit of a challenge, but it's like a puzzle for me, and that's the fun of writing for me.
Let's talk about this moving back, and you talked about the fact that you were somewhere else first. So explain to the people who are watching where were you,
Listen.
and why did you decide to leave and become an artist in Nigeria?
I was a good daughter, doing what my father told me. I studied civil engineering. I lived in Canada for 16 years with my family. And I had followed in my dad's footsteps. I was an engineer, building roads, literally outside, hard hats, steel toe boots, inspecting and building roads. That's what I did. But I also had this other thing, this love for writing poetry. So I'd be sitting in my truck, writing poems. Or every time I was supposed to be inspecting drawings, I'd be, scribbling haikus. It was just this thing had dug itself into me, and I couldn't get away from it really. So the moment I started performing, I knew intuitively that something was changing in my life, and then poetry started to open doors for me, doors that I never expected, and so I started to meet people that I had admired for years, and I knew that this thing was about to eclipse my other life. I also knew that I was desperately unhappy, so I had done what I was supposed to be doing for as long as I could remember. So
Yeah.
I had gone to high school, gone to university, done a 5-year degree, and I had started this career.
Yeah.
And I was being promoted up the ranks. And for most people, that's like, you're supposed to get excited about that. But the more this happened, the sadder I became. And so I had to really sit with myself and decide who I really was or who I wanted to be and what I was willing to give up to be that person. Because what a lot of people don't talk about when you're chasing dreams, in order to get the thing you want, you actually have to give up a lot of stuff to get there. And so what are you willing to gamble for this thing that you know like sits at the core of who you are? And so I knew first I needed to leave my job. I was a little bit strategic in how I did that, but also very much like do or die. Even if I am a broke artist, I would rather be that than anything else. And so I left my job. I also hadn't lived in Nigeria as an adult woman. So coming home was a big part of that equation because I wanted to be here. I wanted for the person that I knew that I was to be deeply grounded in where I was from, where all of my history exists like in one place.
Yeah.
Because no matter how long you live elsewhere, home is this thing that just like you can't get rid of it. And I wanted to like connect to that thing, and I wanted my writing to come from a place of pure honesty and authenticity. And I felt like part of that process was coming back here to kind of find that like a new part of my voice and to see. And I had been back several times and seen that the art scene, there was something happening, and I wanted to be a part of that happening.
You talk a lot about that being authentic and being able to write authentically. People writing from a distance, people writing from home. What is that process and what's that experience been like for you? In terms of looking at your work and what you wrote from a distance and what you wrote when you got here.
Have you ever looked back? You're a writer as well. This might be Wana's secret, but she's also a very, very good writer. And then looking back at something that you wrote years ago. That's what I was saying earlier about I don't put any pressure on myself to be perfect the first time. And so wherever I am, like spiritually or mentally or physically as a woman, my work is going to reflect that. So the person I was when I was 21 can't possibly write what I would write now. And so I look back at that stuff. Some of it is like, like who did that and why?
You cringe.
But some of it is, I'm like, okay, and we're growing along. And so you hope that the work continues to evolve alongside the person that you are. And so that you're getting closer and closer to, you have this like taste and you know what you like. And and there's like a long quote about the artistic process and how your taste and your like abilities are always like, the taste is here and the ability is just...
It never quite meets up.
And so you just keep doing the work and hope that one day these two things, like at least they get closer to each other.
What about performance now and the audience? Spoken word is still something that's growing in our community as well. Did you ever have any difficulty or challenges in engaging with the audience? Or even in terms of adapting your writing style or your performance style?
It's a mixed bag. There are moments, and this happens whether here or anywhere else, there are moments in which when you're in the flow of something that you're performing and the room is with you. You can feel it, like there's something there's like an energy that's happening. When you're not, you can also feel it because you're like, these people are like, they switched off. I've had both of those moments here in Nigeria. And I don't know, I think it depends on the audience. But you also have to, there's a fine balance of trying to create something that people can connect to and people can relate to and still staying true to who you are. Because I know by watching like the formula, I know what I could write to get like the big audience reaction. Because I feel like Nigerian audiences, and that's a big generalization, but in general there's like a taste. I know I could write those poems, but I know that's not who I am. So like finding the balance of, okay, I give you a little bit of what you want, but like I stay here because I know that this is the person that I am. So I've had some really, really amazing experiences here, but I've also had experiences in which I knew because people don't yet understand how to value and appreciate spoken word. It's like, what's this girl? Like, who's this? Like,
does it make you feel like, why am I bothering myself? Do you ever have those moments where you're on stage and the audience isn't with you and they're not giving you that energy?
Of course, where you're performing, there's like there's a open mic situation happening. The band is jamming in the back, and you're performing your heart out.
Yeah.
But people, because they came there that evening to have a few beers with their people and listen to music, you are a disturbance to the program. Why are you here? And so you leave those experiences feeling like, why did I bother? And part of the growing up process, and a lot of it I've learned from you, is being able to say, no, I cannot. I'm not available, and I will not. Because I've decided, I've said, and this is quite recent, which is mind blasting to think that I've only just come to this. But if something does not make me feel good, I can't do it anymore because because there's so little opportunity here. There's a desire to, okay, there's a show, let me go. Oh, there's a thing, let me go. And you do that, you exhaust yourself, and you realize that the quality you're getting for the quantity of shows that you're doing is not there. Poetry for me is a very spiritual experience. It's like there's something emotional that happens to me when I'm performing, and so if I'm not, I can't just go talk and leave. I feel very terrible after doing those. And so if I can see from far, this is going to be one of those experiences. I more often than not, I've decided I can't engage.
A lot of artists share that same feeling. The art is a spirit in itself. Yes. And we always, when you're doing it for a living, you have to recreate the magic. We tend to want to hold on to those moments where you have, the gods have descended and you've written this amazing poem, but it doesn't quite happen all the time. How are you able to recreate the magic? Because you have to keep writing.
And there's a tendency to become addicted to those, okay, God, I'm waiting. Like, give me a poem so that you can just be epic. But you have to, writing is a practice. Yeah. Who knew? Because everybody, I had looked at all these people that I had admired and I just thought these people I was green with envy, both envy and inspiration. But I was like, how do they do, everything you write is magical, but nobody can escape the work of sitting down and creating that magic for yourself. And with poetry, there's exercises you can do, there are places you can go in your mind, but training, even the gift is like a muscle. You have to just keep exercising this thing so that when you appear, Maya Angelou has this quote about how, she sits at a table and she just writes, the cat is a hat in a bat, or whatever. It's stupid, it's terrible, but she realized the more you do that, eventually the muse will come and say, okay, you're ready.
You had a phenomenal year last year.
I did.
You did a TED Talk.
I did do a TED Talk.
You became an actress.
Hey.
And you also were in a play.
I was in a play.
As well. So let's sort of break it down. Let's actually start from the acting. Mm-hmm. So you play, she plays Eki in Gideon. How did you get prepared for the role? How did it happen? That's one. And two, how did it feel like when you walk into a mall and there's this life-size photograph of you
your head
in the shopping mall?
Yeah, that was a bit awkward. Eki happened quite by accident.
Yeah.
So I was performing at a show. You were there.
Yeah.
And the writer of the show came up and said, "Have you ever considered acting?" To which I laughed because I'm like, "Why?" I've never. I feel like a traitor because a lot of actors, when I was 5 years old, I had this dream. I had never imagined that I would. But I was also, had just recently moved back and I was in this just say yes to the universe kind of place. Mm-hmm. So I was going to go for the audition because I just thought it'll be something to add to your list of things that you've done this year. I didn't expect to get the part, especially when I got there and I realized people that are here are people that have been acting. They were auditioned,
they've done their rounds and the hustle.
But I say this thing often about providence and about grace. Being a performance poet and having to memorize poetry had made me not fearful of words. So when I got the script, I was like, okay, I can read this and I can ingest it to a place where it's mine. And then anything after that, I'm just going to do my best. You know what I mean? So I felt like I had, even though poetry and acting are very different things, there was a part of me that had prepared for this moment without knowing it. And so when I was confronted with a page of words, I wasn't like, oh my God. I was able to just, get into the okay. And honestly, I just did the best I could. I was trying deliberately not to act, but just to be in a conversation with my friend or whatever it was. And I got the role, surprisingly enough. And then getting prepared, I don't think I realized that acting was such hard work. I think I just thought, you just go and you just act, obviously. Yeah. but in acting with other people who had been doing this for a very long time, the kind of coaching that happened before we started shooting, I realized that in the same way that you sit down with your pen and paper and you just dig out, you have to go to, and I don't know that I've touched that place. I know that Eki was something I could reach because she was a character that wasn't that far away from me. But I don't know that if you gave me play a drug addicted psychopath or something,
you never know.
I could, I don't know.
You just have to go there.
Exactly, because I've never exercised that side of my brain. So I think I was both sides lucky and almost kind of ready for the role. And the reception was amazing. I thought, okay, people will like it, but I didn't expect that acting was then going to make people interested in me as a person, and then interested in my writing and all this other work I had done. So the two things started to both hands started to wash each other. So I feel like super blessed for that. That was cool.
Do you feel like a fraud sometimes?
All the time around actors, because I'm like, I don't really know what I'm doing, but I'm just trying anyway. But I think because of that, people were interested in the poetry, and so having people ask me, oh, when is this coming out? Oh, where can I find more of your work was really cool. I also found people running into me at random places, like I was at the bank, and they'd be like, are you a key? Or at the airport, I was in the bathroom at a movie theater once, and this girl came up to me, she's like, oh my God, I'm such a big fan of the show. And I go in the stall, the whole time I'm there just waiting for this girl to leave, because I'm like, now she's going to listen to me be and think, it was just super awkward. So there are moments in which, it's been nice. I can't, it's been nice.
Writing is such a solitary process.
Yes.
And then with Finding Home, it's a group of poets, and it's a poetry play, really. So it's a theatre production. What was that experience like, having to work with other poets in terms of both creativity, style, egos?
Finding Home was a real blessing in many ways, in that we got to work with a really amazing director. Yeah. And we also got, as poets, to step off the stage. So even the way that the play was set up, it wasn't like you were standing at a microphone and whatever. It was a circle, and so even trying to break out of your body and be vulnerable, because now every side of you is occupied by a person who's watching you. And doing that while remaining true to the narrative. I learned a lot through that process. I realized that writing and creativity, it's a very sensitive thing. And so sitting together in a circle of people and trying to edit work together, you know how you do your thing. They know how they do their thing. And having to say, okay, well, for the sake of the collective, let's explore this or whatever. There's a bit of that happens. But I think in the end, we made it happen. And people, I was shocked to see people come. The place was full.
It was sold out.
The place was full. And people were coming to see spoken word. And so that told me something about the momentum of this art form.
Okay, then I want to talk about my favorite poem. It's impossible for us to have this conversation without talking about my favorite poem of yours, called Icarus. First of all, I'm going to say, when I was making my short film Shrink, I had to get myself in the mood. I was playing Icarus for so, because every time I listen to it, I cry. And the first couple of lines, I may not remember everything right now, but it says, I once saw you'd help me by joining me in this. Okay. I once saw a man on fire, a gasoline rubber tire soaked around his neck, arms flailing like he was trying to fly. And then
I was too young to differentiate horror from spectacle, so I asked my mother why. With all of the people that surrounded him, nobody brought water.
I think that whole stanza is so profound in the fact that for me it's a scene I remember from it as a child, going to school, and you see a man, a skeleton with a tie around the body, and I also think about it as a metaphor for Nigeria and how we live and being desensitized. Tell me a bit more about what informed that poem for you and why that particular scene came to mind to describe the situation.
I will say that Icarus was a poem that just happened. You have a few of those that they just happened. And the
gods brought that.
After some come on! That poem happened. I was really, I felt like a vessel when I was writing that poem. I wrote it actually before I ever moved back home. I wrote it outside of Nigeria, but still with the idea that I was a part of. I used to have a poetry mentor who'd say to me all the time, if you're going to write a political poem, you have to implicate yourself. It's very easy to be
point fingers, absolutely.
This is wrong, but then how are you in the mix of this thing? How are you implicated? And so I wanted to write Icarus from a place where I was part of this general collective that was doing nothing about everything that was happening. The Dana Airlines crash had just happened. Which is why I thought about Icarus, this myth about this boy who had taken his father's wings and flown too close to the sun. The wings got burned, and he fell and crashed to the ground or into the ocean. There's variations of it, and so that I once saw a man on fire. That line looped in my brain for no less than a month. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew. Why am I thinking about this? Why am I thinking about a man on fire? And I remember this memory from when I was small. And my mom was driving me to lesson, you do these lessons after school. And I remember seeing this guy literally on the side of the road being burnt alive. And I was amazed. Even then, I was quite young, but even then, by everything the bread sellers are still selling their bread. You know, the danfo drivers are still. Everything was happening as though this thing was not happening. And something in my mind, I kept that memory somewhere.
Yeah.
I'd never thought about it before I was going to write this poem, and it jumped out at me when I sat down to write the poem. And so that line again, "Once Saw a Man on Fire," was like a song in my head. And then I wrote the rest of it. I felt as though everything, like, it's like you're in a burning house and everybody's just watching television or acting like it's not happening. That's what Nigeria to me felt like at the time.
Yeah.
And it was it reminded me of that moment, because it's like, why are we not, why are people not marching? And like, and it's also happened. Sorry, I'm remembering it now, and I remember that kind of frustration that happens when you're just looking at a thing and you're thinking, why is nobody doing anything? Why is nobody? And then that Dana Airlines happened. Shortly after that, the four boys, Alu 4, they were burnt, and so like all these things were happening in succession, and everybody would have a moment of like, we're so enraged, and then we would go back, this suffer and smile, we're back to our normal whatever it is that we do. And I knew, I mean, I was guilty of that as well, because you have these moments in which you feel a lot, and then you have to get on with life. But I knew that I had this art, and I knew that I had this voice. And so I'm like, if the only thing I can do is make us see it, or like look at it more, or not forget, then I have to contribute my voice to this thing. And that's why I wrote Icarus.
All right. Then of course I have to go to the other poem.
Which one?
Hide and Seek.
Oh yes.
I actually on radio, I actually recently played hide and seek again. It was so funny because things that are happening in the country, and I was just talking about it, and it felt so evergreen because hide and seek was written about something else, and
even Icarus was written
about something else.
And
I played it, and it was so poignant for its time. And again, you talk about a sentence always being on loop in your head, and in hide and seek, you actually make one sentence a refrain, which is, what do we do with all of these bodies? So tell me about hide and seek, and about working with Femileye on hide and seek.
Hide and seek. Okay, so hide and seek happened because it happened because this thing happened. So there's a lot of like political tensions in our country. And so these girls had been kidnapped. There was a school that the kids had been burnt or like taken from their schools and slaughtered. And so all these things were happening. And so I started to think about, how we play hide and seek when we were little. And so it's a game where you hide and you wait for somebody to find you. And so I was thinking about these girls and how we were treating the situation like they were just playing, and they were just playing hide and seek. And so even in the way you're looking for them, it's very casual. If I find you here, if I find you there, but there was no aggressive. So what if these kids are your daughters? Like, what if you know them? What if they have names and dreams and things that they wanted to do? And so those hide and seek is actually a combination of 3 different poems. And so it's hide and seek, the one about the girls, and then there's what do we do with all these bodies, and then there's the children are asleep in their beds. So all these 3 poems came together, and I realized that they were all saying the same thing, so then it became like a medley. Femi is a good friend of mine, and he does amazing things on the guitar, and I felt like, I always say that spoken word sometimes is difficult to digest, so you have to give people soup for the swallow. So I'm like, let's
I love that analogy, soup for the swallow.
Let's assume that my poetry is like the like the very everything. So Femileye has to be like what's your soup of choice? Egusi, or like a nice ogbono. So that whatever it is I'm trying to say is going down. And I knew that if you give people something melodic, even if they're lured in by the melody, suddenly they're like, oh, okay, like this girl is saying something. I wanted to. There are poetry listeners who are going to listen to poetry, but I want to also seduce the people who typically they're just waiting for their and maybe they can even take something from that as well. And it was a natural like coming together, Femi and I, and so we did it.
All right, so we go into our fire round, so a bunch of questions.
What poem do you wish you wrote?
Woo! For women who are difficult to love, worse than shy.
Favorite color and why?
Red, because red makes me feel like, I don't know, sexy.
What's your most pleasant sound?
Singing. If I could do anything else, I'd be a singer.
When was the last time you cried and why?
Every day.
Why?
Because I cry when I'm angry enough. I cry when I'm sad. If my emotions get too high, I cry because it's like a releasing of the pressure. Why did I cry last? Woo. Okay. I cried.
Best piece of advice you've ever been given?
Implicate yourself. Implicate yourself.
What song would be the soundtrack to your life?
These are tough questions. I don't know. Keep going.
Okay, let's go. If you were a fruit, what would you be and why?
Ooh, I'm a big fan of pineapple. I'd be a pineapple because it's just everything to me. I don't know. I just like the way it tastes. You can have it in a juice. You can mix it with alcohol. Pineapple is an all-rounder.
That is true.
Yeah.
It's a good mixer.
I think so.
Okay. What frightens you?
What frightens me? Failure.
Why?
Because it's not an option, actually. And so I feel like if as an artist you get to a point where you feel like you failed and you haven't, then I'm not sure what's left.
Do you think art can change the world?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because it's the only thing that like actually ever has. I feel like artists are the mouthpiece of the people. And so if I want to know what's really happening in a place, I go to the artists, I go to the poets, I go to the painters, because they are the ones who are speaking the things that nobody else knows how to or doesn't want to. And so if everybody is connected, like plugged into that very honest experience, then you have to change. You have no choice. Art forces you to look at the things you don't want to see.
Thanks.
Thank you, Anna. That was awesome.